I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled into my driveway and saw the empty spot where my brand new propane tank should have been sitting beside my grill. The GPS tracker I had installed inside it was already pinging my phone with movement alerts, and my stomach dropped as I realized what was happening. Someone was actively stealing my property, and they had no idea I was watching their every move on my smartphone screen. My name is Daniel Irving, and I had just moved into the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision in Scottsdale, Arizona, 3 months ago. The house was perfect, a beautiful southwestern-style home with a spacious backyard that I had been fixing up for the summer grilling season. I had spent nearly $400 on a top-of-the-line propane tank just 2 weeks prior, and after hearing about some thefts in nearby neighborhoods, I had invested in a small GPS tracking device that I tucked inside the protective casing. It seemed paranoid at the time, but now I was grateful for my caution. The tracker showed the tank moving down Saguaro Boulevard, heading toward the eastern edge of our subdivision. I grabbed my phone and immediately called the Scottsdale Police Department non-emergency line, figuring I should report this before doing anything rash. The dispatcher took my information and said she would send an officer to my location, but I explained that the theft was currently in progress and the tank was moving. She seemed more interested then, asking me to stay on the line while she contacted a patrol unit in the area. While I waited, I watched the little blue dot on my phone screen move steadily through the neighborhood streets. It turned onto Cactus Way, then slowed considerably before stopping at an address I recognized immediately. My blood started to boil as I realized exactly whose house the tracker had stopped at. 2847 Cactus Way, the home of Linda Ashford, the president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. Linda was exactly what you would picture when someone says the words HOA Karen. She was a woman in her early 50s, with a severely short blonde bob that looked like she had specifically requested a cut that would let her speak to managers more effectively. She wore athleisure outfits constantly, always in matching coordinated colors, and she had made my life miserable since the day I moved in. My mailbox was 2 inches too tall according to the community guidelines. My desert landscaping rocks were the wrong shade of terracotta. My garage door was left open for 30 minutes while I unloaded groceries, which apparently violated some obscure rule about maintaining curb appeal. Every violation came with a formal letter, a fine, and Linda's tight-lipped smile that never reached her cold blue eyes. The dispatcher came back on the line and informed me that Officer Martinez was 3 minutes away and would meet me at my residence. I told her that the GPS tracker showed my stolen property had stopped at the HOA president's house, and I could hear the shift in her tone as she took down that additional information. She asked me to wait for the officer and not to confront anyone myself, which I agreed to, even though every fiber of my being wanted to march over to Linda's house and demand my propane tank back. Officer Martinez arrived exactly when promised, a professional-looking woman in her 30s with sharp eyes that took in everything as I explained the situation. I showed her the GPS tracker app on my phone, the receipt for the propane tank, and the photos I had taken of it beside my grill just yesterday. She nodded as she examined everything, then asked me to get in my car and lead her to the address where the tracker had stopped. I agreed immediately, and we drove the 4 blocks to Linda's house in a small convoy, my Honda Accord followed by the marked police cruiser. Linda's house was pristine, as expected. The yard was immaculately maintained with precise xeriscaping, native plants arranged in geometrically perfect patterns, and a rock garden that probably cost more than my first car. Her white Range Rover sat in the driveway, still running, with the rear cargo door open. And there, sitting on her driveway next to a hand truck, was my propane tank. I felt a surge of vindication as I pointed it out to Officer Martinez, who immediately radioed for backup before approaching the house. I stayed by my car as instructed while Officer Martinez walked up the driveway. She had barely reached the propane tank when Linda came bustling out of her front door, carrying what looked like a label maker and some zip ties. She froze when she saw the police officer, and I watched the color drain from her face before being replaced by an indignant flush. "Can I help you, officer?" Linda asked, her voice tight and controlled. She set down the label maker on top of the propane tank, which made me even angrier because she was literally marking my property right in front of a cop. "Madam, I am Officer Martinez with the Scottsdale Police Department. Do you own this propane tank?" The officer gestured to my tank, her hand resting casually on her duty belt. "Of course I do," Linda said quickly, too quickly. "I just purchased it for the community clubhouse. We are having a neighborhood barbecue next month and needed supplies." Officer Martinez looked at me, then back at Linda. "Do you have a receipt for this purchase?" I watched Linda's jaw tighten. She was trapped and she knew it, but she was not the type to back down easily. "I purchased it with cash from a hardware store." "I do not have the receipt with me, but I can certainly provide it later." "Which hardware store?" Officer Martinez asked, pulling out a notepad. "Home Depot," Linda said, crossing her arms defensively. "The one on Scottsdale Road." Officer Martinez nodded slowly. "Madam, I need to inform you that this propane tank was reported stolen approximately 15 minutes ago from a residence in this neighborhood. The owner has a GPS tracking device installed in the tank, a receipt for purchase, and photographic evidence of it at his property. The GPS tracker shows the tank being moved from his address to this location within the last 20 minutes. Do you have any explanation for this?" I had never seen Linda speechless before. Her mouth opened and closed several times, and her face went through an impressive range of colors from red to purple. Finally, she seemed to settle on outrage as her defense mechanism. "This is absurd," she sputtered. "I am the president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I have lived in this community for 12 years. I would never steal anything from anyone. This is clearly some kind of misunderstanding or malfunction with his supposed GPS device." Officer Martinez remained calm and professional. "Madam, would you be willing to let me examine the propane tank?" "Absolutely not," Linda snapped. "This is my property and I do not consent to any searches. I know my rights." A second police cruiser pulled up then, and Officer Martinez conferred briefly with the other officer, a tall man with a graying mustache whose name tag read Patterson. They spoke in low voices while Linda stood on her driveway, arms crossed, radiating fury. I stayed by my car, my heart pounding, barely able to believe this was actually happening. Officer Patterson approached Linda with a calm demeanor. "Madam, we have reasonable suspicion that this propane tank is stolen property. The owner has provided substantial evidence including GPS tracking data that shows the tank was moved from his property to yours. We can do this 2 ways. You can voluntarily allow us to examine the tank and verify whether it contains a GPS device, or we can detain the tank as evidence while we obtain a warrant. Which would you prefer?" Linda looked like she wanted to argue more, but something in Officer Patterson's steady gaze must have made her reconsider. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth, "but I am calling my lawyer about this harassment." Officer Martinez put on a pair of latex gloves and approached the propane tank. She examined it carefully, running her hands along the exterior before finding the small access panel on the protective casing. She carefully opened it, and there, nestled inside exactly where I had placed it, was my GPS tracking device, still blinking with a tiny green light. The officer held it up for everyone to see. "Madam, can you explain why there is a GPS tracking device inside a propane tank you claim to have purchased today?" Linda's face went pale. I could see her brain working frantically, trying to come up with some explanation that would save her, but there was none. She had been caught red-handed, and the evidence was literally blinking in the officer's hand. "I want to speak to my lawyer," Linda said, her voice suddenly small. Officer Patterson stepped forward. "Madam, I need you to understand the seriousness of this situation. We have evidence of theft, and based on the GPS data and timeline, we can place you at the scene of the crime. I am going to need to ask you some questions." "I said I want my lawyer," Linda repeated, louder this time. Her hands were shaking now, and I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Officer Martinez bagged the GPS device as evidence while Officer Patterson continued trying to get Linda to explain herself. A few neighbors had started to gather, drawn by the police presence. I recognized Tom and Susan Chen from 3 doors down, and the Ramirez family from across the street. Everyone was watching with undisguised curiosity as the HOA president, who had terrorized the neighborhood with petty violations, was being questioned by police. Finally, Officer Patterson made a decision. "Madam, based on the evidence we have collected and the GPS tracking data that places this stolen property at your residence, I am placing you under arrest for theft. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." I watched in stunned amazement as Linda Ashford, the woman who had sent me 3 separate violation notices about the height of my grass, was handcuffed and placed in the back of a police cruiser. She was crying now, her perfect makeup running down her face, her carefully controlled image shattered. The neighbors were openly staring, some with phones out recording the whole scene. Officer Martinez approached me with my propane tank loaded onto Linda's hand truck, ironically enough. "Mr. Irving, we will need you to come down to the station to make a formal statement. We will also need to keep the GPS device as evidence, but you can take your propane tank back now." I thanked her profusely, still processing everything that had just happened. I loaded the tank into my trunk and followed the officers to the Scottsdale Police Department headquarters on Civic Center Plaza. The whole drive there felt surreal, like I was in some kind of strange dream where HOA tyrants actually faced consequences for their actions. At the station, I spent about an hour giving my statement to a detective named Williams, a weary-looking man in his 40s, who seemed completely unsurprised by the whole situation. He told me that they had actually been getting complaints about Linda for months, mostly civil matters that did not rise to the level of criminal activity. But several homeowners had reported feeling harassed by her. One family had even moved out of Meadowbrook Estates specifically to get away from her constant violation notices and fines. Detective Williams took copies of all my documentation, including the receipt for the propane tank, the receipt for the GPS tracker, the photos of the tank at my property, and screenshots of the GPS tracking data showing the route from my house to Linda's. He seemed particularly interested in the tracking data, asking me detailed questions about how the device worked and whether it was possible for there to be any errors in the location data. I explained that it was a high-quality device with accuracy within 10 feet, and that I had tested it extensively before installing it. After I finished my statement, Detective Williams told me that Linda had refused to speak without her lawyer present, which was her right. They had booked her on theft charges, and she would be held until her arraignment, likely tomorrow morning. The detective said I might need to testify if the case went to trial, but given the overwhelming evidence, he expected Linda's lawyer would advise her to take a plea deal. I drove home in a daze, my propane tank secured in my trunk. When I pulled into Meadowbrook Estates, I noticed several neighbors outside their homes, clearly waiting for me. Word had spread fast about Linda's arrest, and everyone wanted details. I gave them a brief summary, and the reactions ranged from shock to satisfaction to outright glee. It turned out that I was far from the only person who had suffered under Linda's tyrannical HOA presidency. Tom Chen told me about how Linda had fined him $500 for parking his work truck in his own driveway overnight, claiming it violated the community's aesthetic standards. Susan Ramirez shared a story about Linda trying to force them to remove a small statue of St. Francis from their garden because it was not on the approved decorations list. Margaret Thompson, an elderly widow from the corner house, quietly mentioned that Linda had threatened to put a lien on her house over a disputed fine for having her Christmas lights up 3 days past the approved removal date. The stories kept coming, each one more petty and vindictive than the last. Linda had ruled the HOA like her personal fiefdom, using the rules and regulations as weapons against anyone she disliked or anyone who dared to question her authority. She had stacked the HOA board with her friends, ensured that all decisions went through her first, and had access to the community funds that she allegedly used for neighborhood improvements, though no one could quite account for where all the money went. That last detail caught my attention. "What do you mean no one knows where the money goes?" I asked Margaret. She glanced around nervously before answering. "Well, we pay our HOA dues every month, right? $300 per household. There are 84 homes in Meadowbrook Estates. That is over $25,000 a month, $300,000 a year. But what do we get for it? They mow the common areas and maintain the clubhouse, but that does not cost $300,000 annually. Linda always says the money goes to reserves and capital improvements, but we never see any financial reports." I did some quick math in my head and realized Margaret was right. The numbers did not add up at all. I suggested that maybe this was something worth looking into, especially now that Linda was facing criminal charges. Margaret nodded thoughtfully and said she would reach out to some other concerned homeowners. Over the next few days, the neighborhood buzzed with activity and gossip. Linda's arraignment was held on Tuesday morning, and according to Tom Chen, who attended, she pleaded not guilty and was released on her own recognizance. Her lawyer, an expensive-looking man in a tailored suit, argued that this was a simple misunderstanding and that Linda had no criminal record. The judge seemed skeptical, but allowed her to remain free pending trial, with the condition that she have no contact with me. Linda returned to her house Tuesday afternoon, and I noticed she kept her garage door closed and her curtains drawn. She did not emerge for the next several days, and the neighborhood felt strangely peaceful without her constant patrols looking for violations. It was like everyone could finally breathe. On Thursday evening, Margaret Thompson knocked on my door with a thick manila folder under her arm and a determined look on her face. I invited her in, and she spread out documents across my dining room table. What she showed me made my jaw drop. Margaret, it turned out, had been a forensic accountant before she retired. She had gotten a hold of the HOA's financial records through a formal request, which any homeowner was legally entitled to make. Linda had tried to block it, but the management company that handled the actual bookkeeping had provided the records once Margaret cited the relevant Arizona statutes. What those records revealed was years of financial mismanagement at best, and outright embezzlement at worst. The HOA collected approximately $300,000 per year in dues, just as Margaret had calculated. The legitimate expenses for landscaping, clubhouse maintenance, insurance, and management fees totaled around $150,000 annually. The remaining $150,000 was supposed to go into a reserve fund for major repairs and improvements. According to the financial statements, the reserve fund should have had over $1 million in it after 7 years of Linda's presidency. The actual balance in the reserve fund was $83,000. Margaret pointed to line item after line item of questionable expenses. $20,000 for consulting fees paid to Ashford Consulting LLC, a company registered to Linda's husband. $15,000 for community event planning paid to Premier Events, a company owned by Linda's sister. $30,000 per year for landscape design services from Desert Dreams Landscaping, which had the same business address as Linda's home office. The list went on, a pattern of self-dealing and conflicts of interest that had drained the community's reserves into the Ashford family's pockets. "This is fraud," I said, staring at the documents in disbelief. "This is serious fraud." Margaret nodded grimly. "I have already contacted the Arizona Attorney General's office. They have a special division that handles HOA fraud cases. I sent them everything this afternoon." I looked at the elderly woman with newfound respect. "Margaret, you are incredible. Does anyone else know about this?" "I have shared it with Tom Chen and the Ramirez family. We are planning to call an emergency HOA meeting to vote Linda out as president and to elect a new board. According to our bylaws, we need 20% of homeowners to request the meeting, and it must be held within 2 weeks. We already have signatures from 30 households." The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the community clubhouse. The turnout was unprecedented, with representatives from 71 of the 84 households in attendance. Linda showed up with her lawyer, looking haggard and defensive. Her perfect bob was slightly disheveled, and she wore an oversized cardigan that made her look smaller and more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. Margaret Thompson took charge of the meeting, calmly and professionally presenting the financial evidence she had gathered. The room erupted in angry murmurs as people saw the numbers for themselves, the blatant conflicts of interest, the missing money from their reserves. Linda tried to defend herself, claiming that all the expenses were legitimate and properly approved by the board. But when Margaret asked the other board members to confirm this, they remained conspicuously silent. It became clear that Linda had been operating with minimal oversight, and the other board members had simply rubber-stamped whatever she put in front of them. The vote to remove Linda as president was 70-1, with Linda casting the only vote in her favor. The vote to remove the entire existing board and elect new members was equally decisive. Margaret Thompson was elected as the new president by acclamation, and she immediately appointed a new board consisting of Tom Chen, Susan Ramirez, and 2 other homeowners with financial and legal backgrounds. One of their first acts was to vote to engage a forensic accounting firm to conduct a complete audit of the HOA's finances, and to cooperate fully with the Attorney General's investigation. Linda left the meeting in tears, her lawyer guiding her out by the elbow while homeowners shouted questions and accusations at her back. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and pity watching her go. She had brought this on herself through years of petty tyranny and greed, but it was still painful to watch someone's life fall apart in real time. My criminal case against Linda for stealing the propane tank moved forward steadily. The prosecutor, an efficient woman named Jennifer Soto, told me that the evidence was overwhelming and that Linda's lawyer had approached her about a plea deal. Linda was willing to plead guilty to misdemeanor theft in exchange for probation and restitution. I told Jennifer that I wanted Linda to face consequences for her actions, but I did not need to see her go to prison over a propane tank. The plea deal seemed fair, especially since the embezzlement charges would likely result in much more serious consequences. The forensic audit of the HOA's finances was completed in early June, about 6 weeks after Linda's arrest. The results were damning. The accounting firm traced over $400,000 in fraudulent payments and kickbacks over a 7-year period. Linda had systematically funneled HOA money to family members and friends through fake invoices, inflated charges, and outright theft. The reserves that should have protected the community were nearly depleted, leaving Meadowbrook Estates vulnerable to any major repair needs. The Attorney General's office filed charges against Linda in late June, 11 counts of fraud, 6 counts of embezzlement, and 3 counts of money laundering. Her husband was also charged as an accomplice for his role in receiving the fraudulent consulting payments. The local news picked up the story, and Linda became a poster child for HOA corruption in Arizona. I watched her on the evening news, being led into the courthouse in handcuffs, and I remembered how smug she had looked when she handed me my first violation notice about my mailbox. My case for the stolen propane tank was resolved first. Linda pleaded guilty to misdemeanor theft in early July and was sentenced to 1 year of probation, 100 hours of community service, and ordered to pay me $400 in restitution, plus the cost of the GPS tracker. She also had to write me a formal letter of apology, which arrived in my mailbox 3 weeks later. It was a single page, typed with no personal touches, expressing regret for her actions and acknowledging the harm she had caused. It felt hollow and meaningless, but I kept it anyway as a reminder of how the whole crazy situation had started. The embezzlement case took much longer to resolve. Linda's lawyer tried every tactic to delay and dismiss, but the evidence was simply too strong. The forensic audit had created a paper trail that was impossible to refute. In October, nearly 6 months after her initial arrest, Linda Ashford accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 5 counts of felony embezzlement and agreed to pay full restitution to the HOA, a total of $412,000 including interest and penalties. The sentencing hearing was held on a cold November morning. I attended along with Margaret Thompson, Tom Chen, and about a dozen other homeowners from Meadowbrook Estates. We sat in the gallery and watched as Linda stood before the judge, looking 10 years older than she had just 6 months ago. Her expensive lawyer made an impassioned plea for leniency, talking about Linda's community service over the years, her clean record prior to these incidents, and her profound remorse for her actions. The prosecutor countered with the scope and duration of Linda's fraud, the betrayal of trust involved in stealing from her neighbors, and the financial harm caused to the entire community. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Catherine Morrison, listened to both sides before delivering her sentence. Linda was sentenced to 3 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. She was also ordered to pay the full restitution amount and was permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership position in Arizona. Linda's husband received 2 years probation and a $50,000 fine for his role in the scheme. I watched Linda's face crumble as the sentence was read. She had clearly been hoping for probation, maybe some house arrest at worst. The reality of actual prison time seemed to break something in her. She started sobbing loudly, and the bailiff had to help her stay standing. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder, but there was nothing he could do now. The judge had spoken, and Linda Ashford would be spending the next year and a half behind bars. As the bailiff led Linda away to begin processing her into the prison system, I felt a complex swirl of emotions. Part of me was satisfied that justice had been served, that the woman who had made my life and so many others' lives miserable was finally facing real consequences. But another part of me felt sad at the waste of it all. Linda could have been a good HOA president. She could have used her obvious organizational skills and attention to detail to actually improve the community. Instead, she had let power corrupt her, had become a petty tyrant and a thief, and now she would lose years of her life to prison. Life in Meadowbrook Estates improved dramatically under Margaret Thompson's leadership. The new HOA board immediately revised the community guidelines to remove the most petty and restrictive rules. My mailbox could be whatever height I wanted within reason. People could park work vehicles in their driveways. Holiday decorations could stay up an extra week without triggering fines. The board published monthly financial reports showing exactly where every dollar of HOA dues went, and they established proper oversight procedures to prevent any future fraud. The community used the restitution money paid by Linda to replenish the reserve fund and make some long overdue improvements. They resurfaced the clubhouse parking lot, upgraded the community pool facilities, and installed new LED lighting throughout the common areas. For the first time in years, homeowners actually felt like they were getting value for their HOA dues. I settled into my home and my neighborhood, finally able to enjoy my backyard without fear of violation notices. I hosted a big 4th of July barbecue using my recovered propane tank and invited half the neighborhood. Tom Chen brought his famous ribs, Susan Ramirez made her incredible salsa, and Margaret Thompson surprised everyone with a delicious homemade apple pie. We ate and laughed and celebrated our freedom from HOA tyranny, and it felt like we were finally the community we were supposed to be all along. The GPS tracker that had started this whole chain of events became something of a legend in Meadowbrook Estates. People joked about putting GPS trackers on everything from lawn ornaments to trash cans. I got asked at least a dozen times about which brand I had used and how to install them. I always happily shared the information, figuring that if my paranoia had helped expose a major fraud operation, maybe a little extra security was not such a bad thing after all. One afternoon in December, about 8 months after Linda's arrest for stealing my propane tank, I was working in my garage when a car I did not recognize pulled into my driveway. A man in his 30s got out, looking nervous and uncertain. He introduced himself as Michael Ashford, Linda's son. I tensed up immediately, not sure what to expect, but he quickly raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. "I am not here to cause any trouble," Michael said. "I just wanted to talk to you for a few minutes if you are willing." I considered turning him away, but curiosity got the better of me. I invited him to sit on my patio and offered him a beer, which he declined. We sat in awkward silence for a moment before he started talking. Michael told me that he had not been close with his mother for several years. They had had a falling out over her controlling behavior, the same behavior that had eventually led to her downfall as HOA president. He had tried to warn her that she was becoming obsessed with power and control, but she had cut him off rather than listen to his concerns. He had only learned about her arrest and the embezzlement charges from the news. "I have been thinking a lot about how she got to that point," Michael said, staring at his hands. "My mom was not always like this. When I was a kid, she was kind and generous. She volunteered at my school, she helped neighbors, she was a good person. But somewhere along the way, she changed. Maybe it was when my dad's business failed and they had money troubles. Maybe it was when she retired early and did not know what to do with herself. I do not know exactly when it happened, but she became someone I did not recognize. I listened without interrupting, not sure where he was going with this. I am not asking you to forgive her, Michael continued. What she did to you and to this whole community was wrong, and she deserves the consequences she is facing. But I wanted you to know that somewhere inside that HOA Karen who stole your propane tank, there used to be a good person. She lost herself, and now she is paying the price. I just hope that maybe, when she gets out of prison, she can find that person again. I appreciated Michael's honesty and his courage in coming to talk to me. I told him that I understood what he was saying, that people were complex and capable of both good and bad. I did not forgive Linda for what she had done, but I did not hate her either. She had made terrible choices, and now she had to live with the consequences, just like everyone else. Michael thanked me for listening and left. I never saw him again, but I thought about that conversation a lot over the following months. It was easy to reduce Linda to a caricature, the HOA Karen who got what she deserved. But she was also a human being who had lost her way, and whose fall from grace had been spectacular and public. There was a lesson in there somewhere about power and accountability, and the importance of staying grounded. The following spring, I was elected to the HOA board myself, something I never would have imagined a year earlier. Margaret Thompson had done such an excellent job as president that she was unanimously re-elected, and she asked me to serve as the vice president focused on community engagement. I accepted, figuring that if I was going to live in an HOA community, I might as well help make sure it was run properly. One of my first initiatives was organizing a neighborhood watch program, which had the side effect of introducing me to neighbors I had never met before. We set up a communication network using a phone app, shared information about suspicious activity, and generally looked out for each other. The irony of setting up a surveillance system in the neighborhood where Linda Ashford had once reigned was not lost on anyone, but this was different. This was neighbors helping neighbors, not someone spying on everyone looking for violations to punish. I also started a community garden project on a vacant lot that the HOA owned. We converted it into raised beds where anyone could grow vegetables, herbs, or flowers. It became a gathering place for the neighborhood, somewhere people could work together on a shared project and get to know each other better. Kids from the elementary school came to learn about gardening. Retirees shared their knowledge and experience. Young families enjoyed the fresh produce. It was everything an HOA should facilitate: building community, improving property values, and enhancing quality of life. In May, almost exactly 1 year after Linda's arrest for stealing my propane tank, I received a letter in the mail from the Arizona Department of Corrections. It was from Linda herself, written in careful handwriting on prison stationery. I almost threw it away without reading it, but something made me open it. The letter was different from the court-ordered apology she had sent me before. This one felt genuine and personal. Linda wrote about her time in prison, how it had forced her to confront the person she had become. She attended therapy and anger management classes. She worked in the prison library and took college courses online. She had time to think about all the people she had hurt with her actions, and she was genuinely sorry for the harm she had caused. Linda specifically apologized for stealing my propane tank, calling it the act of desperation that finally brought her house of cards tumbling down. She said she had been feeling the walls closing in as more homeowners started questioning the HOA finances. and she had convinced herself that if she could just control everything tightly enough, she could maintain her position and cover her tracks. Taking my propane tank was supposed to be another power play, another way to put an uppity homeowner in his place. Instead, it had been the beginning of the end. She did not ask for forgiveness or for me to write back. She just wanted me to know that she understood what she had done was wrong and that she was working on becoming a better person. The letter ended with a simple statement. "Thank you for installing that GPS tracker. It saved me from myself." I read the letter several times, then folded it carefully and put it in my filing cabinet next to the court-ordered apology. I did not write back, but I did not throw it away either. Maybe Linda really was changing. Maybe prison would give her the chance to reset and rebuild her life in a healthier way. I hoped so, for her sake and for her family's sake. Life continued in Meadowbrook Estates, peaceful and pleasant in ways it had never been under Linda's reign. The community thrived under transparent leadership and reasonable rules. Property values increased as word got out about our functional, well-run HOA. People actually wanted to move into our neighborhood now, which was a dramatic change from the exodus that had been happening during Linda's tenure. My propane tank sat beside my grill in the backyard, fully functional and no longer equipped with a GPS tracker. I did not need it anymore. The police had kept the original one as evidence, and while I could have installed a new tracker, it seemed unnecessary. The tank had become famous in its own right, at least within our subdivision. People would point it out at barbecues and tell the story to newcomers about how one stolen propane tank had brought down a corrupt HOA president and exposed a massive embezzlement scheme. I grilled almost every weekend through the summer, hosting neighbors and friends and enjoying my outdoor space without fear of violation notices. Tom Chen and I developed a friendly rivalry over whose ribs were better, a debate that remained passionately unresolved. Susan Ramirez taught me her technique for the perfect carne asada. Margaret Thompson shared her secret for the moistest grilled chicken I had ever tasted. My backyard became a gathering place, which was exactly what I had hoped for when I bought the house. In September, Margaret Thompson informed the board that Linda Ashford had been granted early parole and would be released in October after serving 18 months of her 3-year sentence. There was some concern in the neighborhood about what would happen when she returned, whether she would try to cause trouble or seek revenge. The board consulted with our lawyer and confirmed that Linda was legally prohibited from serving in any HOA leadership position, and that she would be subject to the same rules and oversight as any other homeowner. If she violated her parole or caused any problems, she would be sent back to prison immediately. Linda returned to her house on Cactus Way on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. I happened to be driving past and saw her getting out of a sedan driven by her son Michael. She looked different, thinner and grayer, wearing simple jeans and a sweater instead of her usual coordinated athleisure outfits. She saw me drive by and our eyes met for a brief moment. I nodded slightly, acknowledging her presence without hostility. She nodded back, then turned and walked into her house. Over the following weeks, Linda kept to herself. She did not attend HOA meetings or community events. She took walks around the neighborhood in the early mornings when few people were out. Her lawn was maintained and her house kept neat, in compliance with the community guidelines that she herself had once wielded as weapons. A few brave neighbors reported having brief conversations with her, saying she seemed changed, quieter, more humble. Whether that would last remained to be seen. I never had a direct conversation with Linda after her release. We existed in the same community but in parallel tracks that rarely intersected. I bore her no ill will, but I had no desire to be friends either. She had stolen from me and from the entire neighborhood, and while she had served her time and paid her debt to society, that did not erase what she had done. Forgiveness was possible, but forgetting was not. The second anniversary of the propane tank theft came and went in April with barely a mention. By then, it had become just another story in the neighborhood's history, something that newer residents heard about but that did not define the community anymore. Meadowbrook Estates had moved on, grown stronger, and become the kind of place where people actually wanted to live. The HOA functioned as it should, maintaining property values and common areas without overreaching into petty tyranny. I remained on the HOA board for another year before stepping down to focus on other interests. Margaret Thompson continued as president, providing steady and ethical leadership. The community garden flourished, the reserve fund was healthy and transparent, and homeowners generally felt respected and heard. It was not perfect, no HOA ever is, but it was functional and fair, which was all anyone could really ask for. My propane tank is still in my backyard, still fueling countless barbecues and gatherings. Every time I use it, I think about that surreal day when I watched Linda Ashford get arrested for stealing it, when a simple GPS tracker exposed a massive fraud, when justice actually prevailed. It reminds me that sometimes the small things matter, that standing up for yourself can have ripple effects you never imagined, and that even the most powerful neighborhood tyrants can be brought down by their own actions. I learned that HOAs are only as good or as bad as the people running them, and that transparency and accountability are essential to preventing abuse of power. I learned that sometimes paranoia pays off, that a $50 GPS tracker can be the best investment you ever make. And I learned that communities can heal and rebuild after betrayal, that people can come together when they have a common purpose, and that home really is where you make it. The story of how HOA Karen stole my propane tank and got arrested when the GPS sent an alert to police has become part of Meadowbrook Estates lore. It gets told at community events, shared with prospective homebuyers, and occasionally makes it into local news retrospectives about HOA corruption in Arizona. It serves as a cautionary tale about what happens when power goes unchecked, and as an inspiration for homeowners dealing with their own difficult HOA situations. For me, it is a reminder that sometimes the universe has a sense of humor, that karma is real, and that justice, while sometimes slow, does eventually prevail. My house in Scottsdale is truly my home now, filled with good memories, and surrounded by a community of neighbors who actually care about each other. The propane tank that started it all sits proudly beside my grill, a silent witness to the chaos it caused and the positive changes that ultimately resulted. And somewhere across the neighborhood, Linda Ashford lives quietly in her pristine house, serving out her parole and trying to rebuild a life shattered by her own choices. I do not know if she has truly changed or if she ever will. I do not know if she understands the full impact of what she did, or if she ever thinks about that April afternoon when she decided to steal a propane tank and set in motion the events that would cost her everything. What I do know is that her story, and mine, and the story of Meadowbrook Estates, all serve as proof that no one is above accountability, and that sometimes the smallest acts of standing up for yourself can change everything. The desert sun sets over my backyard as I fire up the grill one more time, the propane tank working perfectly as always. Neighbors will arrive soon for another gathering, another evening of food and laughter and community. The GPS tracker is long gone, preserved as evidence in some police storage facility, but its legacy lives on in the transformed neighborhood around me. Life is good in Meadowbrook Estates these days, and I have a stolen propane tank and its tracking device to thank for that. Sometimes the most interesting stories start with the simplest things, and sometimes justice really does prevail, even in the complicated world of homeowners associations.